The bells rang across the city of Valheim at midnight. But these were not the gentle chimes that marked the hours. These were warning bells, deep and terrible. Commander Marcus Thorne stood on the eastern wall and watched the sky turn from black to an unnatural crimson. The Blue Goddess had spoken her final words to the High Priestess just 1 hour ago. After 3,000 years of protection, she was leaving. The barrier of light that had kept the Void Walkers away from human civilization was fading. By dawn, it would be gone completely. The soldiers around Marcus looked terrified. Some were praying. Others were crying. The younger ones had never known a world without the goddess. They had grown up believing that the blue shimmer in the sky was eternal. Marcus understood their fear. He felt it too, deep in his bones. But he also felt something else, something that surprised him. He felt angry. For 3,000 years, humanity had relied on the goddess. They had built their cities under her protection. They had stopped developing weapons. They had stopped training real armies. Why would they need such things when a divine being protected them? The goddess had made humanity weak. She had made them forget what they truly were. And now she was abandoning them. Captain Elena Voss approached Marcus with a report in her hands. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. She told him that the last evacuation ships had departed for the southern colonies. The elderly, the children, and the sick were being moved to safety. But there were still 2 million people in Valheim. The ships could not carry them all. Someone had to stay and fight. Marcus asked how many soldiers they had. Elena checked her notes and said they had 40,000 trained guards. But they were not real soldiers. They had never fought anything more dangerous than street criminals. Their weapons were designed for crowd control, not war. Against the Void Walkers, they would be like children throwing stones at a storm. The Void Walkers were creatures from beyond the stars. Ancient texts described them as living shadows with claws of pure darkness. They consumed everything they touched: cities, mountains, entire worlds. Before the goddess came, humanity had fought them for centuries. They had lost billions of lives. They had been pushed to the edge of extinction. The goddess had saved them. She had created a barrier of divine light that the Void Walkers could not cross. For 3,000 years, the creatures had waited in the darkness between stars, watching, hungry, patient. Now the barrier was failing. Scouts reported massive shapes moving in the crimson sky. The Void Walkers knew. They could sense the weakening protection. They were gathering for the feast. Marcus called a meeting of all military commanders. The great hall of the Defense Ministry was crowded with officers. Most of them looked lost. They had never prepared for this situation. They had never imagined that the goddess would leave. Marcus stood before them and spoke plainly. He told them that the divine protection was ending. He told them that the Void Walkers would attack before dawn. He told them that many would die tonight. But he also told them something else, something that made the room go silent. He reminded them of what humanity was before the goddess came. They were not weak creatures waiting to be saved. They were survivors. They were fighters. Their ancestors had battled the Void Walkers with primitive weapons and iron will. They had held their ground when gods and angels fled. The goddess did not save humanity because they were helpless. She saved them because they impressed her. She saved them because even in defeat, they refused to surrender. Marcus pointed to the old museum across the street. Inside were weapons from the ancient wars: plasma cannons, fusion bombs, battle armor that could withstand the touch of darkness. For 3,000 years, these weapons had been treated as historical artifacts. Tonight, they would serve their original purpose. The officers began to understand. Some of them started to smile. They were not beaten yet. They had forgotten their history, but history was still there, waiting to be remembered. Over the next 4 hours, the city transformed. Engineers who had never built anything more dangerous than household appliances began studying ancient weapon designs. Factory workers who made luxury goods started producing ammunition. Scientists who had focused on entertainment technology began analyzing the Void Walker's weaknesses from old research files. The knowledge was still there. It had been preserved in databases and archives. It just needed to be awakened. Elena led a team into the museum and retrieved the ancient weapons. The plasma cannons were heavy and awkward, but they still worked. The fusion bombs were unstable and dangerous, but they still contained enough power to destroy a small moon. The battle armor was old-fashioned and uncomfortable, but it still offered protection against the darkness. Marcus organized the defense in 3 layers. The outer wall would be held by volunteers with plasma weapons. The middle district would be defended by professional guards with fusion grenades. The inner city would be the last stand, protected by anyone who could hold a weapon. It was not a sophisticated plan. There was no time for sophisticated plans, but it was a human plan. It relied on courage and determination, not divine intervention. As the hours passed, something remarkable happened. The fear in the city began to change. It did not disappear. Fear was necessary. Fear kept people alert, but it mixed with something else: pride, defiance, anger. The people of Valheim had been abandoned by their protector. Instead of collapsing into despair, they were standing up. They were preparing to fight for their own survival. The first Void Walker appeared at exactly 3 hours before dawn. It came through the fading barrier like a shadow passing through mist. It was enormous, nearly 50 meters tall. Its body was made of pure darkness, and its eyes burned with a cold hunger that had waited 3,000 years to be satisfied. Behind it, thousands more waiting. Marcus gave the order to fire. The plasma cannons roared to life. Beams of superheated energy struck the creature's body. The Void Walker screamed. It was a sound that made the air itself tremble, but it did not die. It staggered forward, reaching toward the wall with claws that could tear through steel. Elena ordered the fusion grenades deployed. The explosions lit up the night like artificial suns. The Void Walker's body came apart in pieces, dissolving back into the darkness from which it came. For a moment, there was silence. Then the soldiers on the wall began to cheer. They had killed a Void Walker, without divine help, with their own hands. More creatures came through the barrier, dozens, then hundreds. The outer wall became a battlefield of fire and shadow. Soldiers died, many soldiers. Their bodies vanished into the darkness, consumed by the hungry shadows. But for every human that fell, another took their place. For every Void Walker that advanced, 2 more were destroyed. Marcus fought alongside his soldiers. He had never been a warrior. He had trained as an administrator. But tonight, everyone was a warrior. He fired a plasma rifle until the barrel melted. Then he picked up another. He threw grenades until his arms ached. Then he threw more. Around him, ordinary citizens were doing the same. Teachers, merchants, artists. They had never held weapons before tonight. Now they were fighting like the ancient heroes they had read about in history books. The battle lasted until dawn. By the time the first rays of sunlight appeared on the horizon, the outer wall had fallen. Half the middle district was in ruins. The inner city was surrounded by darkness and death. But the Void Walkers had stopped advancing. Something unexpected had happened. The creatures were retreating. They were pulling back through the gap in the barrier, disappearing into the space between stars. Marcus did not understand at first. Humanity had not won. They had been losing. The city was almost destroyed. Why were the Void Walkers leaving? Elena found the answer in the old archives. The Void Walkers fed on despair. They consumed hope along with flesh. They were strongest when their victims gave up, when their victims surrendered to the inevitable. That was how they had conquered countless worlds across the galaxy. They came with overwhelming force and waited for the resistance to break. But humanity had not broken. Despite impossible odds, Despite abandoned protection, despite certain death, the people of Valheim had fought back. They had refused to despair. They had refused to surrender. And that had hurt the Void Walkers more than any weapon. Their darkness could not touch a spirit that refused to go quietly. The creatures had expected a feast. Instead, they had found poison. In the aftermath of the battle, the survivors gathered in the central plaza. Nearly 100,000 people had died. The city was in ruins. The blue barrier in the sky was completely gone. But the Void Walkers were not returning. They had learned something tonight. They had learned that humanity was not easy prey. They had learned that the goddess had not protected weak creatures. She had protected dangerous ones. Marcus stood before the crowd and spoke. His voice was tired but strong. He told them that the goddess was gone. The protection she offered would never return. But they had discovered something more valuable. They had discovered themselves. They had discovered that they did not need divine protection. They had the strength to protect themselves. The reconstruction began that same day. Engineers started building new weapons. Scientists started researching new defenses. Soldiers started training with ancient techniques that had been forgotten for millennia. The era of divine protection was over. The era of human protection was beginning. Word spread to other cities, to other colonies. Across the remnants of human civilization, people heard the story of Valheim. They heard how ordinary people had stood against the darkness. They heard how courage had defeated creatures that gods feared. And they began to remember what their ancestors had known. Humanity was not weak. Humanity had never been weak. Within 1 year, a new defense network was established across all human territories. Within 5 years, the Void Walkers were being pushed back to the darkness between stars. Within 10 years, humanity had reclaimed worlds that had been lost before the goddess ever arrived. They did not fight with divine light. They fought with fire and steel, an unbreakable will. The goddess watched from wherever divine beings watch. She had withdrawn her protection deliberately. She had seen humanity growing weak under her care. She had seen them forgetting their true nature. Her departure was not abandonment. It was a gift, the most difficult gift she could give. She had given them back their pride. She had given them back their strength. She had given them back the fierce spirit that had impressed her 3,000 years ago. In the end, humanity did not need a goddess to protect them. They had always been capable of protecting themselves. They just needed to remember. And on that terrible night in Valheim, when the barrier fell and the darkness came, they finally remembered. They remembered that they were human. And that had always been enough.